Is the Nationals leader David Littleproud. There's lots of patriotism, nostalgia in that. Ed, does it stir you just a little?
No, a catchy tune, but this is more serious than just the vibe, and that's what all the government's been able to articulate about this, because they're not prepared to provide the detail. You're the voice, try to understand it. I think Australians are trying to understand it, but the Prime Minister hasn't been prepared to take them into his trust, to put the legislation about the mechanics of the voice so that they know what they're voting on. He's saying, just trust us. We'll do this after you give us the yes, and we'll design it, we'll put it in there. Well, he controls the parliament. He controls the legislation that goes into this place. So he'll decide what the mechanics of this is, what he puts forward. And the fact he's not prepared to do that just speaks volumes that he doesn't trust the Australian people. So why should they trust him? He's got 2 more days before he goes off from Parliament. He could actually table it now if he wanted to bring the Australian people into his trust before he goes overseas. But I doubt that he's going to do that, unfortunately.
Parliament decides, though, doesn't it? Not a government.
Well, the government runs the parliament, and what will happen is that he knows exactly the mechanics, and this goes to the heart of the actual mechanics of it. The Nationals have a principled view that this isn't a new proposition. This is a proposition we've had before, a representative body, and we live with the scars of that in rural and remote Australia, where the gap hasn't been closed. And what we're saying is repeating the mistakes of the past won't close the gap, but not even being prepared to provide any of the mechanics of how that representative body would work and its reach goes to show the Prime Minister isn't prepared to show the Australian people what that is. He's the Prime Minister. They are the government. They get to determine what they put into this parliament. So why wouldn't he put that in now and show the Australian people exactly what the proposition he wants to put forward as the mechanics of the voice?
Peter Dutton says if he wins the next election, he will have a second referendum if this fails, and that will just be about constitutional recognition. Would you vote against that?
No, I think the Nationals have been very clear on this. Our principal position on this has been that we are repeating the mistakes of the past. It's not a new proposition. This is a representative body, one in which we've had a similar one before. If this was about constitutional recognition, I sense my party room would overwhelmingly support that. I think it's important. And as I've said, that there'll be no victory lap from the Nationals if this goes down.
Okay, so you do support constitutional recognition?
We've said that from the start. From the very beginning, we've said that if this was just about constitutional recognition, then we would be part of that. And I think what that process needs to look like is due process, where a constitutional convention takes place. Because if you're going to change the Constitution, it shouldn't be just one cohort of the population that get to have a say on that. It should be all of us that bring together the eminent minds to make sure that the intent of the change and that the question doesn't have unintended consequences. That due process wasn't afforded to the Australian people in this. And if we go down this path, and which we're prepared to work constructively towards with either the Liberal Party or the Labor Party, if the Prime Minister wanted to pull up now, he still has 2 days. The writs haven't been issued. He could actually just actually say that this is about constitutional recognition. He's divided the country. You only have to look at the polls to see that. And if he wanted a unifying moment, we've given him every off-ramp to take that and say, just make it about constitutional recognition. He knows that we'd support that, but unfortunately, he hasn't taken our hand, and unfortunately, he's divided our country no matter the result.
Didn't you express concerns about even constitutional recognition, that having some kind of race-based wording in the Constitution was divisive? Have you changed your mind on that?
No, my words have always been that if this was a simple set of words put in our Constitution, that was a statement of fact, that Indigenous Australians were here first.
What are you thinking about? So this is, there's 4 tranches in this current policy from this government, and the first one is the wording of constitutional recognition. So
through a voice to Parliament, and that's where it's conflated, Laura. That's where the conflation.
Other than that having that voice, how would you word it,
Laura? This is why you have a constitutional convention where eminent minds greater than mine can come together and put a statement of fact that Indigenous Australians were here first, that we made serious mistakes along the way, but we are better having been together, and we will be better sticking together. There are minds in our country that we would bring together to make sure that was appropriately put forward to the Australian people, so that the intent of Australian people making that statement of fact, acknowledging them as being here first before any white settlement, is one that could be done appropriately with everybody in agreement. That's
Well, not
the due
everyone
process
is in
of
agreement.
uniting
That's
the
the
nation.
problem. That's the problem, David. I mean, not even
Well, they're a
your
lot
side
more
of
than what they are at the
politics
moment,
can
Laura.
agree on that. I mean, there's not a small cohort of people on the right that think there shouldn't be any race-based change in the Constitution. So, I mean, I'm just worried. I'm just worried. Yeah, sure. But you had 10 years to do it. And isn't it fair that some in government now point out that, OK, you want to change the Constitution. You also criticise things that are just, based in profound words but no action. Wouldn't a second referendum just be that?
No, well, it's about making sure you do it right, because once you change the Constitution, it's permanent. And it's very difficult to change. And that's why you should do it right. That's why you should respect.
Shouldn't we have more detail from you at this point then? If you're saying to people, don't vote yes to this, if we win the next election, we'll do another referendum, well, what's the practical change?
The proper process, Laura, whereby a constitutional convention, where you bring together, as we have in previous referendums, is brought together the eminent minds to make sure the intent of a statement of fact that Indigenous Australians were here first, and that we are better having been together and we were better sticking together, and making sure that the intent and the wording of that goes to the very heart without unintended consequences. That is the proper process that has not been afforded to the Australian people under this Prime Minister.
Sure.
And what we're saying is that that's a proper process. And then if you want to actually
what an eminent mind is, though? You know, we're getting into weird territory,
well,
you know what I mean?
Well, you are, and I think let's just be practical about this. You actually have a cross-section of the population that are invited to contribute, as all Australians are, and then obviously debated out at a convention, a constitutional convention. So I don't think that's an earth-shattering new proposal that normally is done and should have been done even for this proposal. The Prime Minister didn't afford us of that. The only constitutional convention he said was the 250 Indigenous Australians that turned up to Uluru. And not even the all Indigenous Australians agree with it. So this is where you need to make sure that you can unify the country around where the vast majority will support. I understand we live in a free democracy, not everyone will support, but the vast majority will. And that's the political leadership that Peter Dutton's showing. I'm prepared to show, and we hope that the Prime Minister would. And then not conflating it with closing the gap with practical measures around local empowerment, not by repeating the mistakes of the past of a representative body that we've had before. And we live with the consequences in the bush.
Yeah, not conflating it is one thing, but that's the whole point, isn't it? You have this symbolic move, and that's fine. Everyone agrees that that's not enough. But then what is the solution? I mean, I think we need to hear more from your side of politics, don't we?
I can give you the solution. I can give you the solution, and I've been talking about this with great passion for the last nearly 12 months, is that we need to first do a forensic audit of the over $4 billion that's been spent in trying to close the gap each year, in making sure that we have a 2023 intervention. That intervention starts in Canberra with the bureaucracy, getting them out of Canberra and making sure local elders in local communities are empowered. That's how you close the gap, because we know to the postcode. We know to the postcode where the gap hasn't been closed. And what we need to do is empower those local elders with the local community, with the generosity of financial support the Australian taxpayers provide to make sure that the program is designed to.
If it's that easy.
Well, and Laura, to the extent we have, it's not all doom and gloom out there. You know, over 97% of Indigenous children actually go to kindergarten. Over $5 billion was put into Indigenous procurement programs for Indigenous businesses to actually employ over tens of thousands of Indigenous Australians in giving them a head start. And so this is about making sure that we do work and build on what we've been able to achieve, and where we've slipped, that we understand that you actually have to empower the local community. And I've seen it in my own outback communities where they've taken leadership roles, the local elders, and were empowered at a local level, not at a big regional level where their representative covers hundreds of thousands of square kilometres, but in a local little town of 1,000 and 1,200 people. That's how you close the gap. That's how you use common sense, and that's how you make sure that a minister takes control of his bureaucracy or her bureaucracy and sends them out and empowers those local communities, and making sure that there is local solutions with the money that the Australian taxpayer is prepared to spend to close that gap. That's how you close the gap. That's the practical common sense solutions the Nationals have been talking about for nearly 12 months now.
Okay, let me quickly ask you about Qantas. Do you think some of these bonuses should be paid to Alan Joyce? We're talking about the millions, millions upon millions. And what about the current CFO who's about to take over the reins of Qantas? Shouldn't Vanessa Hudson be part of the answering of these questions? And perhaps we should get a new vision as to where Qantas is going.
Well, look, if I was a Qantas shareholder, I'd be pretty disappointed with what's happened, and particularly when you've got the ACCC looking into some of their actions and the seriousness of them and the potential fines that could be there. Obviously, that would then raise questions about the prudence of providing tens of millions of dollars in bonuses when there is potentially an active investigation underway into some of the company's actions. I mean, I just think that there needs to be a pause on this, and the shareholders of Qantas have got every right to want to actually ask some very serious questions. And I would have thought that institutional investors, who invariably hold many of the votes in this, should be injecting themselves into this debate very quickly, because I think this goes to the very currency of the Qantas's brand and their standing in the community. And that's before you even get into the facts of what they've been able to do with the government on keeping Qatar out, which I think is a very serious issue for Australians in a cost of living crisis, and about getting not just more tourism numbers into Australia, but also getting agricultural exports out on those planes back into the Middle East. We've got to get some real clear answers from the government on this today. They've been shirking for this. They've had 7 or 8 different reasons for why they've done this, but none of them seem coherent at the moment.
Nope, you're right, they don't. Hopefully you can get those answers today. David, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks.